All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. You ready to dive in? Today, we're tackling how to get your podcast on YouTube.
Should be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one. We've got some great source material to work with today.
Definitely.
So we've got, first of all, straight from the source, create a podcast in YouTube Studio from the YouTube Creators Channel. And then how to start a podcast on YouTube. Complete YouTube podcast tutorial. That's from Primal Video.
Yeah, they're a great resource.
Yeah, they really know what they're talking about.
They do.
So, okay, first question, and I think a lot of people are probably wondering this. Why would you put your podcast on YouTube? I mean, it's a video platform, right?
Right. Well, YouTube is really making a big push to attract podcasters.
Really?
Yeah, they are. They've got all these features just for podcasts now, like special badges for your videos and playlists,
Oh,
search cards to help people find your podcast. They've even got a dedicated section on youtube.com/podcasts. Yeah, and probably one of the biggest reasons is YouTube Music. When you put your podcast on YouTube, it automatically becomes available to a huge audience on YouTube Music who are already listening to audio content.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a really big potential boost.
Yeah, okay, so how does it actually work? Like, how does a podcast actually exist on YouTube?
Well, basically, your podcast on YouTube is a playlist.
A playlist.
So think of it as like a container for all your episodes, and each episode is just a video within that playlist.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how do you actually create one of these podcast playlists?
It's really easy. You just go to YouTube Studio, you click on Create, and then select New Podcast, and then you just give your podcast a title, write a nice description, choose who can see it, and upload a square thumbnail.
Wait, a square thumbnail. Why square?
Oh, good catch. So a square thumbnail lets viewers know right away that it's a podcast, not just a regular video.
Oh, okay.
Plus, it helps you stand out, from all those typical landscape thumbnails. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good way to visually differentiate yourself.
That's smart. Okay, so now that we've got the playlist created, how do we add episodes, the videos, to it?
Well, you can add a video to your podcast playlist right when you upload it. There's a details step where you can do that.
Okay.
Or if you already have videos on your channel that you want to include, you can add them to the podcast playlist through the content tab.
Gotcha. What about the order of the episodes in the playlist? Does that matter?
Yeah, actually it does. It depends on what format your podcast is. So if it's like an episodic podcast where each episode is its own standalone thing,
Right.
you probably want to have the newest episode at the top of the playlist.
So people see it first.
Exactly. So people see your latest content.
Yeah.
But if your podcast is serialized, like where it tells a story over multiple episodes, then you'd want to put the oldest episode first so people can listen in order.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the playlist, we've got the episodes. Now, how do we make sure people can actually find it? Right, discoverability, that's huge.
Yeah.
One thing that both sources stressed is to keep your podcast title and playlist title the same.
Oh, okay.
Don't add extra words like podcast or anything like that unless that's really like part of your brand name.
Okay.
Keep it clean, keep it simple. And another thing, the playlist should only have full episodes.
Gotcha.
No bonus content or, random clips.
Oh, interesting.
People should know exactly what they're getting when they click on that playlist.
I like that.
And then don't forget the description. You really want to hook potential listeners. Tell them what the show's about, who it's for, why they should subscribe.
Right.
Use those keywords. Really sell it.
Like the elevator pitch for your podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like we need to have a really solid plan in place before we even think about hitting record.
Absolutely. You need to know exactly who you're talking to, who your target audience is. Primal Video was adamant about this.
Makes sense.
Like, what are their interests? What are their needs? What problems can you help them solve with your podcast?
Yeah, because you're not just creating content, you're creating a product for a specific audience.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that. So, okay, once we know our audience, how do we come up with a good title?
Okay, so for the title, keep it concise. Make sure it's pronounceable, easy to spell, and unique.
Oh, right, because someone might be hearing it for the first time.
Exactly. You don't want them to, stumble over it or not be able to find it because it's too similar to some other podcasts.
Totally.
And don't forget that description we talked about earlier. It should be geared towards your audience, too.
Right, yeah, using the right keywords.
Think about what would make you want to subscribe if you were them.
Okay, so that's the content side of things. What about the gear? Do we need, a fancy studio to make this happen?
Not at all. You probably already have most of what you need. A computer for recording and editing, obviously.
Right.
A decent microphone. That's non-negotiable. Good audio quality is so important. And a camera, even a basic webcam or your phone will do.
Okay, so you're saying I don't have to break the bank.
Nope. Although do invest in a decent microphone.
Right.
Listeners might forgive bad video, but bad audio, it's just, it's a deal breaker.
That's a good point. What about lighting?
Lighting can definitely help, but honestly, natural light from a window can be just as good.
Oh, okay.
If you're recording in a dimly lit space, though, then yeah, maybe think about a simple lighting setup.
All right, so we've got our concept, our target audience, the gear. Now we need the software to actually record and edit this thing.
Right. For software, they had some really good suggestions that are both user-friendly and affordable.
Awesome.
So if you're doing a solo podcast, Descript is a really great option. It handles recording, editing, and you can even edit the transcript of your audio, and it automatically edits the audio and video to match.
Wait, you can edit the audio by editing the text?
Yep. Pretty cool, right?
That's amazing.
And if you're planning on having guests, they recommend platforms like StreamYard, Riverside.fm, or even Squadcast, which is actually built into Descript now.
Wow.
Those are all great for remote recordings, making sure everyone sounds and looks good.
I love it. Okay, so now, before we get into brainstorming episode ideas, which I want to talk about, Primal Video said we should come up with like 20 episode ideas before we even start recording.
I love that advice.
Really?
Yeah, it forces you to think long term, make sure you have enough content to keep people interested, and it helps you avoid that, that creative block.
Right.
And it helps you test your idea, make sure you're making something people actually want to listen to.
That's really smart.
Yeah.
Okay, so 20 episode ideas. But how do we know if people are actually interested in those ideas?
Well, they recommended using tools like answerthepublic.com and TubeBuddy.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah, they let you research popular topics and questions within your niche.
Oh, so you're essentially giving people what they're already looking for. That's genius. Okay. So let's say we've got those 20 episode ideas, brainstorm, we've used those tools, we're feeling good. Are we ready to hit record?
Almost. Primal Video suggests having at least 3 episodes ready to go when you launch.
3.
Yeah, it gives new listeners a good sample of your podcast, helps them decide if they want to subscribe.
Right, that's a good point.
Like a little tasting menu for your podcast.
I like that. Okay, so 3 episodes are ready, we're feeling good. How do we get them up on YouTube?
Okay, so back to YouTube Studio. You click on Create and then select New Podcast, or set an existing playlist as a podcast if you're using an existing playlist.
Okay.
You'll need your title, description, those visibility settings, and that awesome square thumbnail.
Right.
And then, you upload your episodes.
Easy enough. Okay, but here's a question, and this is something I think a lot of people might not realize. Just because your podcast is on YouTube, that doesn't mean it's automatically on, like, Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Right. That's a really important point.
Okay, so how do we get it on those platforms?
You need to use a separate podcast hosting service.
So like Buzzsprout, Libsyn, Anchor, those kinds of platforms.
Exactly. They'll distribute your podcast to all those other listening apps.
Okay, that's good to know. So YouTube's a great starting point, but we need to think bigger if we want to reach the biggest audience.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about setting up your podcast on YouTube, planning your content, getting the gear, the whole 9 yards. But it feels like we're just scratching the surface of what it takes to actually create a successful podcast.
Yeah, and that brings us to the next phase of our deep dive.
Yeah.
How to create amazing content that will keep those listeners coming back for more.
Okay, let's get into it.
Welcome back.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork, but now it's time to talk about the content itself, the heart of the podcast.
Yeah, because you can have all the right gear, the best software, but if the content isn't good,
Yeah.
it's not going to matter.
Right. It all comes down to the content.
Exactly.
Primal Video had a really interesting point. They said we should think of each episode as a mini product launch.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's not just content for content's sake.
Right.
It's like, what are your listeners' needs? What are their pain points? What are they searching for? Just like you would with any product.
Exactly, and that goes back to knowing your target audience.
Right.
Who are you making this podcast for? What are they interested in? What problems are you trying to help them solve?
Yeah, once you know that, you can really start brainstorming those episode ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And those tools we talked about, answerthepublic.com, TubeBuddy, those are really helpful for that.
They're like cheat codes, basically. They
Yeah.
tell you what people are already searching for.
That's so smart. Okay, so we've got our episode idea.